1997, and a town meeting in Savunga, Alaska.
It seems like over the last few years, there's been a great opening of water between here and there. There's nothing but young ice, that's all.
Something strange is happening to the land these Arctic peoples call home.
But this year the sun is so hot, it's just like being in the interior. You get very hot.
An explanation from a stranger in the crowd.
One of the things that people try to sort out is that, anybody's climate everywhere, it's always changing a little bit.
Greenpeace's Steve Sawyer, who studies climate change and its impacts on the Arctic, adds that there are other factors contributing to the changes.
But what the climate scientists are telling us now is that it's a result of burning too much fossil fuels, oil and coal and gas, that's building up a lot of extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And over the global level, we know that the Earth is actually warming up as a result of that.
Today, scientists in the Arctic state conclusively what these Arctic peoples have known for decades. Their lands are changing. Glaciers are melting, wildlife populations are declining, vegetation is moving, and once stable sea ice is thinning, all at an alarming rate. This fragile northern ecosystem is in jeopardy, as are those who have relied upon it for millennia to survive.
And good evening, friends, and welcome to our major news for tonight. It is a Tuesday around the Marshall Islands, the 14th day in the month of September, 1999.
Halfway around the world, remotely nestled in the South Pacific, another culture in a vastly different but equally fragile ecology is also confronting change.
Today, we have Yumi Chrysostomo, Climate Change Coordinator from the RMI Environmental Protection Authority. My first question for you, Yumi, is explain what is climate change.
To me, climate change is variations in climates. For example, temperatures, changing in temperatures, increasing in temperatures, or decreasing in temperatures. Different current patterns from what is normal.
The Republic of the Marshall Islands is feeling the wrath of a warming world too. A series of environmental changes is pushing the ecological limits of this remote region to such a degree that the concept of evacuation is no longer just a fear, but an impending reality. The Marshall Islands comprises over 1,200 low-lying coral atolls and islands and has a population of about 60,000. The Marshallese have inhabited these remote islands for centuries. Living within the closed ecological system of the atolls and insulated from the rest of the world until the last century, the Marshallese forged a unique relationship with the land and sea.
It's almost like they coexist, the land and the people. It's been a way of life between the land and the sea. We depend so much on both, and there's respect for it, for both elements.
However, this delicate symbiosis between culture and ecology is changing.
One of the biggest concerns we have in the Marshall Islands, being a low-lying island without mountains, we've seen a lot of erosion.
Storm surges, flooding and droughts too. The frequency of natural disasters has increased over the years, and the worst is yet to come.
There's a lot of changes going on, and we feel that this is all from the emission of gases into the atmosphere.
Yumi's work as a climate change coordinator involves gathering research on climate change, organising public meetings, communicating the issue to the Marshallese public, and investigating changes on the islands. On this occasion, Yumi is visiting a family where only 3 years earlier, a rogue wave nearly shattered their lives forever.
There was a child. This child was only a week old when the waves came on land. Grandmother was holding the baby, and the waves, she said the wave just took the baby away. And they were looking for the baby, and they couldn't find the baby for a while. When they finally found the baby wasn't breathing. Brought the baby to the hospital.
The child fortunately survived, but the incident has forced this family to take more precautions. Freak weather events are becoming the norm in this tropical haven, so a storm wall is maintained to prevent other disasters. Also, because the sea is rising.
They don't actually say sea level rise. They just say, if you translate it into English, that the water came up, something like literal translation.
Dr. Kuniyuki lives in Majuro, the capital of the Marshall Islands.
What is answered is a question of global warming. It is happening. What we do not know is how quickly it is happening, and the consequence of that being how quickly sea level will rise and how much it will rise.
The average elevation of the Marshall Islands is 2 meters above sea level, so slight variations in the level of the sea have devastating consequences.
The rise in sea level will come because there's a greater increase of water volume being contributed to the ocean. Quite a lot of the water now is held in glaciers that sit on land. If global warming, either because of the air temperatures or including the change in the water temperatures, cause the glaciers to move into the ocean and then subsequently melt, then the sea level can rise. And the issue about that is, since there's really a substantial amount of water held in these glaciers, it can mean that the rise can be quite significant.
Although there are regional differences, the sea level has risen on average by about 20 centimeters. Glacier melting is believed to have contributed about 15 to 20% of this increase over the century. With the dramatic increase in temperature that has occurred over the last 2 decades, glacier melting is now contributing up to 50% of sea level rise, wreaking havoc not only on the Marshalls, but on other small island nations with similar topography.
But if one's taking a long-term perspective on this, then the greatest threats to small island nations would be in terms of sea level rise.
John Hay from Auckland University in New Zealand studies the effects of climate change on small island nations.
Projections are that if sea level rose by as much as 1 metre, and this is a rather extreme projection, then something like 80% of the Marshall Islands would be vulnerable to the effects of sea level rise.
A lot of these homes are not that high off the ground, and so the homes will become inundated very frequently. That will begin to cause the structures to collapse, and that would make habitation difficult. So we're looking at issues like that that will affect the ability for people to remain living here in the atolls.
The point that has to be made in terms of response options of Pacific Islanders, that one option that is often canvassed is that they become environmental refugees.
Okay, if you need this boat again, why don't you ride in with me in that boat?
Environmental refugee, a label known all too well by many inhabitants of the Marshall Islands. Nuclear testing in the 50s left many atolls and islands uninhabitable. In 1985, hundreds of Marshallese were moved from the island of Rongelap to avoid radiation. Today, the prospect is that the entire nation may need to evacuate.
What we are looking at are factors of time and who is affected in terms of the population. What we are looking at for small island nations like the Marshalls is an uncertainty about the time frame, but on the other end, about who will be affected, the percent is more than just significant, is virtually the entire population that will be affected.
I can't begin to describe it. I'll just say that it's something that really is going to hurt the people. Yeah, we can adjust, we can try and adjust, but
The Arctic. Cold. Harsh. Nevertheless, biologically unique, culturally rich, and arguably unmatched in beauty. The Earth's white crown is jeweled with some of the world's most distinctive mammals. Millions of migratory and residential birds, and a rich ice-edge community of creatures and cultures. Temperatures around the world are increasing. On average, the world has warmed by 0.5 degrees. Alarmingly, the Western Arctic is warming between 3 and 5 times faster than the rest of the world. The Western Arctic and subarctic supports a sensitive ecology, where slight annual temperature fluctuations can have enormous implications. In addition, 1/3 of the world's mountain or temperate glaciers are found in these pristine lands.
Temperate glaciers have streams on their surface, water that runs through the interior of the glacier, and subglacial streams. So the temperature of the ice is very, very close to zero. It's below zero, but it's coexisting with water that's above zero. And so we have a situation where a slight change in temperature, annual temperature, can have a major impact on the thermodynamics of the glacier and result in a rapid melting.
Glaciers worldwide are melting, with few exceptions. If current warming trends continue, the future of the mountain glacier is bleak. Predictions are that in 50 years, 1/3 of the world's mountain glaciers may be lost. By the end of the next century, half of these glaciers will have flooded into the sea.
We can see in the last 2 decades significant thinning in large parts of the glacier. In one particular example, we have one area where the glacier has thinned approximately 165 meters, more than 600 feet, in a period of 20 years. And that represents, in that one location, more than a third of the glacier disappearing in a 20-year time period.
Today, these northern lands are changing rapidly. Recent data shows that the Arctic ice pack has thinned 40% over the last 40 years. Climate scientists from NASA and the United Kingdom's Hadley Centre are 99.9% certain that these melting trends are the result of global warming. The result of which affects more than just sea level rise for remote island nations. The permafrost is melting, weather patterns are becoming less predictable, and these majestic nomadic kings of the Arctic food chain are finding it difficult to adapt.
Well, the food chain in the Arctic is short, and the algae that grows on the bottom of the ice is eaten by the zooplankton, which in turn is eaten by the Arctic cod, which are in turn eaten by the ring seals, which are eaten by the polar bears. And that's about as simple as a food chain gets in the world. And any change in any one of those things can affect, anything along the chain.
A weakened link jeopardizes the integrity of the entire food chain. An added problem for polar bears is that they also rely on the sea ice to hunt. Now that the ice edge is retreating significantly and freeze-up is happening later, it is becoming harder for polar bears to feed. Noticeably undernourished bears such as this one are becoming a more frequent sight. In August of 1999, an international team of researchers travelled aboard Greenpeace's Arctic Sunrise to the retreating Arctic ice pack in Alaska to study other climatic impacts on wildlife. Greenpeace's Steve Sawyer was the expedition leader.
We've been working with local scientists in this part of the world for the last 3 years, documenting the impacts of climate change and assisting them in their research wherever we can. We're particularly interested in the impacts in the polar regions of the world because the signal-to-noise ratio is highest there. In other words, the impacts stand out from the background of other human industrial activity more clearly in the polar regions.
Down almost at the far right, Laurie. I can't see him at the moment.
Yeah, one back.
2-year-old size or larger?
Huh?
Okay.
Dr. Brendan Kelly from the University of Alaska was head of the research team.
Right now we're seeing fewer calves than we are 1-year-olds or 2-year-olds. It looks to us like the survival has been poor for at least the past 3 years in the young. In other words, we'd expect to see more calves than 1-year-olds at this point.
The ecological chain of dependence does not end with wildlife.
It affects us on getting less food to have feed our family, put on our table there.
John is from Savunga, a small Alaskan community of Yupik Eskimos located on St. Lawrence Island, which is only 30 miles off the coast of the Russian Far East. The population is 600. Other small communities like Wales and Deering are also confronting the changes.
I think it was the elders who first noticed that probably about 2 decades ago that the climate definitely had changed. It's been really noticeable like in the past 10 or 15 years.
Like those living in the Marshall Islands, Arctic peoples have also developed a unique relationship with the land and sea. A subsistence relationship, where seasonal sustainable hunting enables the community to thrive throughout the year and during long, harsh periods.
The changes in the ice this spring, the ice was really rotten and the hunters were unable to get as many uguks. It's the bearded seal we always make seal oil from. And I think they lost most of them, and the ones that they did get, they had empty stomachs, and they usually don't have empty stomachs. Their stomachs are usually full of whatever food they eat.
Changes in wildlife populations, changes in seasons, changes in wind patterns and a growing frequency in storms all impact on these Arctic peoples' ability to rely on the land.
With the storm, we can't really go out, unless we want to risk our lives, which we wouldn't. And it's been, even this spring, it was mostly storms. We hardly went out in the boats at all. I mean, not much, not like we used to.
Arctic peoples have always been able to triumph over extreme conditions. But for the first time in their long history, the changes may be insurmountable. These changes are not only affecting their ability to gather food, they are also peeling away strong cultural ties and traditions with the land.
Our subsistence way of life does not survive, then it will affect our language, our traditions, the things we teach our children.
We're getting away from the cultural activities that we're familiar with, and if it comes to a point where it becomes too difficult to carry on our hunting activities, I can't see anything but trouble for our people.
It takes away part of our children's history, our history, my father's history, my whole life, and my children's. We're talking about people's lives.
Two lands and two peoples confronting environmental change and, as a result, cultural loss. Although separated by thousands of kilometers, they share a similar fate directed by one single cause: climate change. Climate change is induced by a buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, linked to the burning of fossil fuels. The solution to the problem, on the surface, is easy enough. Reduce the use of fossil fuels and replace the world's energy needs with clean, renewable sources, such as wind and solar. However, the political might needed to implement the necessary changes appears non-existent.
Will recommend the adoption of this protocol to the conference by unanimity.
In December of 1997, during the Kyoto climate change negotiations, there appeared briefly a will on behalf of governments to reduce the amount of carbon being loaded into the atmosphere. World leaders agreed, in principle, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from industrial countries by about 5% below 1990 levels by the year 2012. The protocol signalled at the very least that the world was acknowledging the environmental phenomenon, its cause and consequences. Nevertheless, the 5% emissions reduction target was seen as being well below that needed to stave off further climatic chaos.
We left Kyoto feeling quite sad because some of even our neighbors, bigger country neighbors like Australia and New Zealand, we're not really listening to our concerns.
2 years later, world leaders again gathered to discuss the protocol in Germany. COP5 was a meeting held for nations to ferret out and agree on the mechanisms needed to implement the Kyoto Protocol.
These numbers show that we are not going to meet our goal of Kyoto as we're going, because the numbers are going up.
Again, large industrial countries were stalling. Saudi Arabia is interested in weakening the protocol because it is the largest producer of oil and fears financial losses. The US is also stalling the process and putting profits before people.
The world is going to need petroleum for a long, long time, with or without Kyoto. Our aim is not to bring the market for, even if our aim were, we're not in a position to bring the market for petroleum to a screeching halt or even to a very, very rapid decline.
In a vastly different physical and social climate, immersed in a political maelstrom unlike any encountered before, Yumi is frustrated with the progress.
Just to put it very strongly, I think that industrial countries are dragging their feet.
Yumi is in Bonn, attempting to articulate her country's plight regarding climate change. But it is not working.
To me, it's very, I'm disappointed. Its progress is very slow, and it's a lot of talk. And a lot of people are just dragging their feet and just wasting time.
Currently, most of the large industrialized countries have not ratified what their leaders agreed in Kyoto. And for many, time is running out.
I feel that those bigger countries should have some responsibility, should have some concern for people in this kind of environment where there's nowhere else to go.
The sooner people that affect our lives make changes, the better it will be for us.
I wish they could come up here at least for a week and live the way we have to live, and then watch it disappear and not be able to do anything about it. It's hard.
The Marshall Islands and the Western Arctic are two areas of the world described by scientists and environmentalists as frontline ecosystems. Regions of the world feeling the wrath of climate change first. There are others who are fearing the impacts on the front line.
Neither the Maldives nor any small island nation wants to drown. Nor do we want to become environmental refugees either. We want to stand up and fight.
The population living on the Maldive Islands south of India share the same fate and anger as those on the Marshalls.
Greenhouse effect that we are feeling today is the result, a direct outcome of what the industrialized countries have done.
Today, the signs of climate change are no longer isolated to remote regions. Extreme weather events the world over are growing in frequency and intensity. In North Carolina, the flooding which followed Hurricane Floyd forced tens of thousands from their homes.
My wife's pregnant. Don't even know where we're going to come home to. She's due any day.
And caused billions in damages.
Back in '96, we had a flood that we thought set a record, but this one has about doubled or tripled it. So this is the worst thing we've seen in our field. And talking to some people that have lived around here all their lives, this is the worst they've ever seen.
Greater instances of flooding and drought the world over are telltale signs that the world's climate is changing. It is no longer just a problem for small pockets of populations, but a phenomenon that could affect millions around the globe.
We ought to see government leaders and fossil fuel executives, all those who want to promote a business as usual path, to come down and see what the long-term consequences of climate change are likely to be. And what that is more floods like this, more droughts, more extreme weather conditions, and more human misery that's associated with all of those things.
There's no doubt in our minds. We can see the evidence of climate change all around us, Dick. The difficult part is getting that message across to the people who are causing the problem in the big industrial centers and the Western democracies who insist on burning fossil fuels that are going to bring about dangerous climate change.
This is one world. We're all citizens of this world, and whatever one does will always affect the other, whether it's in a positive way or negative way, and in this case, it's in a negative way. And as in the martial arts, we believe in one global village, and I think this village should take care of itself, make sure that everybody does their part to help out.
Climate change. The stakes are high, interests divided, and time is a resource becoming scarce. The voices telling their tale are fearful of what is happening today, but also concerned that they will not be the last whom are affected.